I'm Harper, 35 years old, an interior architect whose name briefly adorned the cover of Architecture magazine. Last October. It was supposed to be a milestone, a marker of achievement. But when that feature came out, the 2 pages dedicated to the restoration of the Plantain Riverside estate, there was no congratulatory call, no message of pride from my family, no acknowledgement. They simply didn't know how to see me beyond the eldest daughter who hadn't quite figured out her life. Madison, my sister, was the golden child, the one who had it all figured out, or at least that's what they thought. She was the one who, despite all odds, was settling down in their eyes. And so, I hoped for a fleeting moment that my pregnancy might be the bridge, the one thing that could make them finally notice me. Perhaps my baby would be the key that opened their hearts. But 6 months ago, that hope vanished. The heartbeat I had listened for every morning in that sterile ultrasound room ceased to echo. The miscarriage didn't just steal a child. It stole my sense of self. I fell into the darkest pit, barely managing to rise for 3 weeks. The white crib I had ordered from Italy still sat in the center of the room, mocking me with its cold emptiness. I never held my child, never whispered a single word of goodbye. Yet the world seemed to move on as if it hadn't happened. Then 3 days after I was discharged from the hospital, my mother called. I braced myself, but her voice was casual, detached even. "Have you cleared the room yet? Don't let the gloom linger too long. It's not good." I stared at the phone in disbelief. The grief that had once felt like an open wound was now buried under layers of shame and dismissal. "Yes, I know," was all I could manage. She never asked how I was, never offered comfort. Instead, she told me to avoid upsetting Madison. "It could affect the baby's mental health," she said, as if my heartache was nothing but an inconvenience. I turned to Marcus, the one constant through it all. He never left my side. He sat with me in the silence, reading, cooking, wiping away my tears, as if they didn't even belong to me anymore. He understood. He never needed words. And when Aunt Evelyn called each night, she never asked if I was okay. No. Evelyn's wisdom cut through my sorrow with one simple statement. Don't force a smile around people who don't deserve it. If you need to cry, then cry. If you need to scream, scream. In those moments, I learned that the world wasn't going to give me the space I needed to heal. I had to make that space for myself. And yet, in the face of all this, the people who should have been the most understanding only made me feel like a burden. My family had always been cold. My mother believed I was too ambitious, always too much for their simple lives. My father saw my accomplishments as nothing more than hollow achievements. When Madison was accepted to a local community college, they threw a lavish dinner in her honor. When I won a full scholarship to study architecture in New York, they merely questioned why I had to make life harder by going so far away. And now, a week ago, I received an invitation from Madison, pregnant the golden child, inviting me to a celebration, a party. To commemorate her pregnancy, attached was a handwritten note from my mother. "Harper, are you free Saturday night? You're her sister after all. Help out with the decorations. You've always had good taste." I read the note over and over again, my heart frozen in place. Not a single word acknowledged that I had once carried life within me, that I had once been pregnant. Not a single inquiry about how I was doing. It was just a simple demand. "A chore help out?" "You owe the family." Marcus stood by watching me as I folded the card. "You don't have to go," he said, his voice soft but firm. He knew. He knew it wasn't just a party. It was another reminder of how I would always be the shadow in their lives, the one who could never measure up. "They're my family," I said. My voice strained as I tried to hold back the tears. If I don't go, they'll say I'm selfish. Marcus didn't say anything more. He knew that I had been clinging to a concept of family that no longer existed, but he understood the weight I carried, and so I went. Saturday afternoon, I stood in front of the 2-story white house, arms full of lavender-themed decorations that Madison had requested. The house hadn't changed since the last time I was here, the day I had announced my pregnancy, only to be met with a blank stare from my mother, instead of the congratulations I had hoped for. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with forced cheer. Madison sat in the center of the living room, her barely showing belly already cradled like a treasure by our mother. They laughed as Dad brought out a cake decorated with an ultrasound image. "Does the baby look like me?" Madison asked, her voice bright. I smiled weakly and nodded, my stomach twisting. My mother announced, "Harper's here," as if I were nothing more than a supporting character arriving on cue. "Did you bring the stuff?" she added quickly, her tone more businesslike than familial. "I've set up the tables in the garden. Help decorate. Madison shouldn't be moving around too much." "Yes, I'll get to it," I replied quietly, walking toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of my own invisibility. As I laid out ribbons, lights, and paper flowers, I could hear my mother's voice from inside Harper's good at this sort of thing. "Right, Madison? It's lucky you've got such a capable sister. Takes the worry off your shoulders." I arranged the lavender in a glass vase. The scent of it filled the air, and for a brief moment, I was overwhelmed by the emptiness inside me. The ache in my chest wasn't just the loss of a child. It was the realization that I would always be the one who was unseen. My fingers tightened around the ribbons so much that they turned pale, as if I could somehow anchor myself to this moment. The party began at 4. Relatives and friends trickled in their faces, beaming, praising Madison's glow and my parents' fortune. I stayed near the dessert table, arranging pastries and smiling politely. No one mentioned my pregnancy. No one asked if I was tired after handling the entire decoration setup alone. The hollow warmth in my chest seemed to grow with every passing minute, the silence louder than any spoken words. Except for Jason Madison's husband, the only person in my family who ever made me feel truly seen. Quiet, perceptive, and far too aware of the spaces where I wasn't allowed to exist. Jason was a medical resident 4 years older than Madison, but he understood the weight of things. As I tied the final ribbon to the chair, he approached me. "Harper, are you really okay?" His voice was soft, but there was no pretense, no pity, just raw honesty. Startled, I looked up into his eyes. They weren't filled with hollow sympathy, they were just concerned. "I'm okay, thank you." I said the words tasting bitter on my tongue. He seemed to want to say more, but at that moment, Madison called out to him. "Jason, come take pictures," she shouted, and he cast me one last look before turning away. I watched him disappear into the crowd, and with it, the only real connection I had felt all day. As the party wound down, Madison approached me, her sweetness a sharp contrast to the cold air that seemed to settle between us. "You're amazing, sis," she said, her voice dripping with gratitude. "I don't know how today would have turned out without you." Before I could respond, my mother chimed in, her hand heavy on my shoulder. "That's what sisters are for, thoughtful, selfless." She said her words like a cloak of guilt thrown over my shoulders. I looked at her, feeling for the first time that the distance between us was wider than any ocean could measure. But I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that she didn't see me, or the realization that I had stopped hoping she ever would. Once most of the guests had left, I went outside to clean up. The chill in the air cut through my sleeves, making me shiver as I worked to pack away the lights and the flowers. Marcus, standing silently at my side, placed his jacket over my shoulders. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. "Give me a minute," I whispered. I needed to breathe, to stand beneath the tree where the lights were slowly dimming. their glow fading like a dream slipping through my fingers. I wasn't sure what I was still holding on to. A hug, maybe. A simple apology, I couldn't tell. But as the final bulbs flickered out, I stood still, watching them fade away. I was no longer sure of what I was searching for in this family, in this life. That night after we returned home, I sat in the dark with my phone turned off, staring at the silent screen. I couldn't bring myself to reply to Madison's message. Thanks for today. Oh, and next week's the gender reveal ultrasound. Come if you're free. I mean, you probably know all about that stuff already. I didn't reply. I just sat there full of questions no one would ever answer. Why did every bit of blame always fall on me? Why was my pain never worth listening to? I didn't know what came next, but for the first time, I thought to myself, if blood ties can shatter you, maybe it's time I find myself. Not for them, for me. The gender reveal party came the following Sunday, a mild afternoon at a rented villa outside Mount Pleasant. The house, a grand yet quaint countryside home, had a wide porch and a backyard that stretched toward the pine forest at its edge. Madison wanted everything to feel cozy, intimate, and elegant, and naturally she turned to me to bring that vision to life. I almost declined, but Marcus encouraged me to go. One last time, he said, close the chapter with nothing left owed in love or duty. I arrived earlier than the others to finish setting up under the porch. The pastel pink and blue balloons were carefully arranged, and in the center of the yard sat a large table draped in white linen, topped with a sealed box. Madison said it would reveal the baby's gender in the most surprising way. It was all theatrics, a performance for everyone except me. By 3, the guests began to arrive. Family. Madison's friends, my father's colleagues, and even strangers I didn't recognize. They all mingled, laughing and chatting, their voices a blur around me. I made sure not to linger too long in any one spot, afraid that someone might notice the flicker of real emotion beneath my carefully constructed smile. Marcus and Aunt Evelyn were there too. Evelyn, with her sharp eyes, didn't bother hiding her tension when she saw my mother. I tried to avoid the discomfort by staying busy refilling glasses of juice, rearranging the chairs. Then Madison stepped out glowing in her white lace maternity dress, Jason's hand in hers. The microphone in her other hand amplified her voice as she beamed. Thank you all for coming, she said. Today's special, not just because we're finding out the baby's gender, but because it's a chance to celebrate those who've always been there for us. I was hanging the final balloon when she raised the microphone, her voice cutting through the air. And most of all today, I want to thank the person who helped organize this whole party, despite everything, my dear sister Harper. The claps that followed felt distant, as though they were coming from someone else's life. I gave a small nod and forced a smile, but as Madison grinned that slight, crooked smile of hers, it felt like she was preparing for some bizarre performance. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just invisible to my family. I was being used as a backdrop in their perfect picture. Oh, and one more special thing. Madison's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, her tone overly casual, as if she were announcing something insignificant. You know why Harper had so much time to help me? She paused, letting the words hang in the air like an unspoken threat. It's because she's not busy with the baby anymore. The room froze. I could feel the blood drain from my face as my breath hitched in my throat. My entire body went rigid. She didn't just say that. The silence stretched as thick and heavy as the air before a storm. Marcus shot to his feet, his face turning ashen, ready to storm the stage. But I raised a hand, stopping him before he could utter a word. My pulse hammered in my ears, each beat louder than the last, as the room's energy shifted like sand beneath my feet. The awkward laughter from some of the guests was strained. Fake. Others turned away, pretending not to hear. Jason stood there frozen, as if he couldn't process the words that had just slipped from his wife's mouth. I could see it in his eyes, the disbelief, the regret, but I couldn't focus on him. My gaze was fixed solely on Madison. I took a step forward, my voice low but steady. "What did you just say, Madison?" She blinked, as if genuinely confused by my reaction. "Oh my gosh, don't be so tense." She laughed, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You're always so sensitive. I was just joking. Everyone knows, right? It was a joke." I shook my head slowly. "Joking." My voice dropped to a whisper, but each word felt like it was searing into the air. "You use someone's loss as a punchline, Madison? Don't you see how wrong that is?" Before she could respond, my mother was at my side, her hand clasped tightly around my arm, pulling me away from the crowd with a strength I didn't know she had. "Harper, you're making a scene," she hissed under her breath, her grip like iron on my skin. I barely had the chance to speak before she yanked harder. "Can't you just hold it in? You turn everything into a tragedy." I could feel the walls closing in. "I just want to be treated with respect," I muttered, but my voice barely made it past my lips. Without a second of hesitation, she growled, "If you don't want to shame this family, you'll shut up and get back out there." I yanked my arm free, my eyes blazing. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "You've never cared how I felt. Only Madison matters." My chest tightened. "I lost a child, and you never even hugged me." Her face flushed crimson, her lips curling into a sneer. "You always play the victim. That's why no one loves you." My heart cracked, but I stood my ground. "If that's what you think, then—" Suddenly, she shoved me hard on the shoulder. It was a forceful, violent push, and before I could brace myself, my feet slipped. I stumbled, my back slamming against the wooden railing. The world tilted beneath me, and then nothing. The next thing I knew, I was falling a rush of air, filling my ears. Everything else disappeared. The guests, my family, even my pain. For that split second, there was nothing but the endless blue sky above me. Had my mother finally seen me? I wondered as I plummeted. Even if it was only to push me away, the world went black. I woke in a stark white room, the sterile scent of antiseptic invading my senses, making my head spin. My throat was raw, my body a mass of aching bruises. My left arm was in a cast. My back screamed in agony with every shallow breath. I tried to lift my head, but it felt like lifting a stone. Then I saw him, Marcus. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He was holding my hand, his grip firm, as if he might lose me again. "Harper." His voice trembled raw with emotion. "You're alive." I tried to speak, but no words came out. A single tear slipped down my cheek. I was still alive after falling from the second floor. "I'm still here." Marcus carefully brought a glass of water to my lips, helping me sip. He exhaled deeply, as though he were preparing himself for something important. "Harper, someone wants to see you, but only if you're ready." I barely managed to whisper, "Who?" Marcus glanced toward the door. "Jason," he said quietly. "He's already spoken to the police. There's something you need to know." Jason entered, his face hollow. The man I had known completely gone. The calm exterior he once held was shattered. His eyes were full of torment, regret. He sat beside me, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry for everything," he whispered, his voice thick with guilt. I stayed silent, too stunned to speak, my heart pounding in my chest. Jason took a deep breath, as though he were forcing himself to speak the truth. I've stayed silent for too long. He began, his voice ragged, but after what happened, I can't anymore. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. I held my breath, the air thick with fear and a desperate need to know. It wasn't an accident, he said, his voice breaking. A cold wave swept through me, my heart hammering painfully in my chest. What do you mean? Jason pulled out a stack of papers from his coat pocket, and then with trembling hands he produced a small packet of tea bags. My world seemed to slow as he laid them out in front of me. I had them tested at the clinic where I work, Jason continued. Those were the same tea bags you drank, the ones Madison gave you. The nausea, the dizziness, the racing heart. All of it. It was never just stress. It was something more. Something Madison had known all along. They found alkaloids that interfere with fetal development. The words hit me like a physical blow. I went numb. It wasn't an accident. They had done it on purpose. Jason's voice trembled with the weight of his confession. And that's not all. He took a shaky breath before continuing each word, a punch to the gut. I pulled old texts from Madison's phone. She messaged your mom, 3 more days of this and it'll be done. Don't worry, she's too weak. Marcus' hand gripped the chair so hard his knuckles went white. I could feel the heat of his rage beside me, but I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My body was frozen in this state of disbelief. Yet the tears still came, not from the physical pain, but from something much deeper. The unbearable sting of betrayal. Jason's gaze dropped to the floor. We turned everything over to the police, he said, voice breaking. The prescription your mom filled under a fake name. Security footage from the kitchen. Your mom's involvement. Jason's statement. They're building a case. I shook my head, my body racked with sobs. How had it come to this? How had the people who were supposed to love me, the ones I'd believed would protect me, become the very ones who plotted my destruction? My chest ached as though it would collapse in on itself. Jason's voice was thick with regret as he spoke again. I stayed quiet for too long. Harper, for family, out of fear, but I can't let you carry this alone anymore. I looked at him, my eyes searching his face for any sign that this was all a nightmare. I gave a slight nod. The truth had come out in a way I never imagined, and it stung like nothing else. But at least now, it was finally out in the open. A short while later, a woman in business attire entered the room. She was poised sharp, but there was an undeniable kindness in her eyes. Harper, she said, her voice steady but filled with empathy. I'm Clarissa Monroe. I'll be representing you in this case. I nodded slowly, trying to process the gravity of what was happening. Marcus squeezed my hand, his grip firm, his voice steady. From now on, we won't let anyone hurt you. Again. I turned to him, my heart swelling with gratitude. It was as if, despite everything, despite the family that had failed me, there was still one person who saw me. Even if blood had pushed me off a ledge, it was a stranger who had reached out and pulled me back. And this time, I wouldn't let go. 2 days later, I was moved to a private room, the kind of quiet space with a window that overlooked a small park. Autumn sunlight poured through the sheer white curtains, casting soft shadows across the tile floor. Everything around me was calm. The world outside was at peace. But inside, the storm still raged. Attorney Clarissa Monroe returned holding a stack of files. She sat beside my bed, her posture composed, but I could see the careful weight in her eyes. She took a deep breath before speaking. Harper, she began, her voice calm, yet filled with the gravity of what she was about to say. "There's something I need to share with you. It's difficult to hear, but I believe you have a right to know." I nodded, bracing myself for the worst. "The police have taken preliminary statements from your mother, from Madison, and from a few other relatives," Clarissa continued. "There are things that sound unbelievable, but much of the evidence aligns with Jason's testimony." I clutched the blanket tighter, my fingers digging into the fabric. The room was closing in on me. But I had to hear it. I had to know everything. "Tell me." I whispered the words, barely escaping my lips. Clarissa exhaled slowly, her voice dropping lower. "Your mother, Candace, stated that ever since you and your sister were young, she was told something by your grandfather, Thomas Wellington." I froze. Grandfather. I could feel the ground shift beneath me. I had never heard of anything like this. She continued, "Something he called a family tradition. The first grandchild, born in the next generation, must carry the Wellington name in order to inherit the farmland trust valued at nearly $1 million. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. What Clarissa's eyes softened, but her words were unrelenting. "Your grandfather passed away 5 years ago, but he left an addendum to his will that could only be opened when his first great-grandchild was born. The condition was clear. The inheritance would only be granted if the child had the Wellington surname and was raised by a family member with that name." I was shaking now, my world shattering before me. "Madison changed her last name to Foster after marrying Jason," Clarissa continued. "But Candace insisted that Madison's child would have the name legally changed to qualify, and more than that, she believed Madison, the deserving daughter, should be the one to have the first child if you gave birth first." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I whispered the words, barely making it out of my throat. "Things would get complicated." Clarissa nodded slightly, her gaze steady. "They didn't want you to become a mother first. They feared losing the inheritance to you. Your baby was an obstacle." I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed what she was saying. My entire life, I had believed that even if my mother didn't love me the way she loved Madison, I was still her daughter. But now, I realized the truth. I was never meant to be a part of their plan. In the end, I was just a threat to their inheritance, their legacy, their control. And as my world crumbled around me, I understood the depth of their cruelty. My baby hadn't been an obstacle to them because of who they were. It had been an obstacle because of what they stood to lose. They chose to erase a life to protect their gain. The words hit me with a finality that crushed whatever hope had been left. They had planned this. They had chosen to destroy everything to take away the one thing I could never get back, my child, because it threatened their grip on something far more important to them than my life or the life I had carried. Clarissa's voice was soft, almost too soft, as she gently placed a stack of printed messages on the table between us. These conversations were recovered from Madison's phone. Some of them are hard to read. She paused, watching my reaction carefully before pushing the stack closer to me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen as I read the words, my heart stuttering in my chest with every line. "What does Harper have?" One message read, "Her name's not even in the will." Another, "Her kid wouldn't be a Wellington either. That baby was never supposed to exist." The last one stopped my breath altogether. "Don't worry, Mom." I switched the tea. 3 more days and it'll be done. Then Harper will be left with nothing but an empty belly and pity. My heart pounded in my chest. The room seemed to spin as my vision blurred with tears. They had plotted my loss. They had turned my grief into something cold. something they could manipulate and control. Clarissa placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me in the moment. "Harper, they weren't just cruel," she said, her voice heavy with empathy. "They manipulated both the law and morality to get what they wanted, but we have proof, and this time, they won't get away with it." I sat in stunned silence, the weight of the truth sinking in every word, digging deeper. I whispered almost to myself, Does he know about the inheritance?" "No," Clarissa replied, her tone solemn. "He was kept completely in the dark, but when he found out he was devastated, he's working with his own lawyer to file for divorce." I closed my eyes, a new wave of tears threatening to spill. Madison, my sister, the girl who once shared my childhood bedroom, whispered stories under the blankets and called me the best sister in the world. She had betrayed me. She had used me. Clarissa stood up, adjusting the stack of files in her hands. "I'll return later with the investigator and the civil complaint documents. You need rest." I barely nodded before she left. Marcus entered a few moments later, sitting beside me and handing me a glass of orange juice. I looked at him, my eyes brimming with sorrow and disbelief. "I used to think I was just the leftover in the family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now I know I never really had a family at all." Marcus held my hand, his grip steady and unwavering. "You will," he said quietly, his voice filled with a gentle resolve. "Not from blood, but from the people who choose to love you, protect you, and never let you go." I nodded slightly, feeling the warmth of his words seep into me. In that moment, despite the wounds still healing, I knew I would rise again, stronger, braver. That winter, I would find myself again. The trial began at Charleston County Court. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. The cold fluorescent lights hanging above and the high wooden ceilings made everything feel distant and unreal. The chill in my chest never left. Every time I looked across the room, my gaze fell on my mother, my father, and Madison, sitting on the defense side of the table, the very people who had once been my family. I sat beside Clarissa and Marcus, surrounded by Aunt Evelyn and a few supportive colleagues who had quietly stood by me through it all. Jason sat in the back alone, solemn and reflective. He had filed for divorce just a week after learning the full truth. The prosecutor began presenting the evidence: audio recordings, text messages, prescription receipts, statements from the clinic, and security footage from the old house. Every piece of evidence felt like a blade carving through my chest, not because it hurt more, but because it forced me to face the truth. I had tried so desperately to deny. First, Madison denied everything. She claimed she was just following Mom's lead, that she didn't know the tea was harmful, that it was all a misunderstanding between sisters. But when the prosecutor read aloud the message, "Don't worry, 3 more days, and she's done." "She's so weak." Madison's composure shattered. She collapsed into herself, her eyes wide with disbelief, and then she was silent. She didn't speak another word for the rest of the trial. My mother, Candace, held on to her pride until the end. When questioned, she spoke directly to the judge. "We did it for the family's interest. For tradition, Harper was never truly part of this lineage." My father, Franklin, remained silent. When it was his turn to speak, he could only repeat, "I was just doing what my wife wanted." Then it was my turn. The room fell silent as I stood, my legs shaking, but my voice clear. I told the story from beginning to end, not skipping a single detail. I looked each of them in the eyes, my mother, my father, Madison, and said the words I had waited my whole life to say. "I don't need your pity. I need justice, and the child I lost deserves to be acknowledged as part of the truth." 3 weeks later, The verdict was announced. Madison was sentenced to 4 years in prison for intentionally harming a pregnant woman and conspiracy to interfere with reproductive health. My mother and father each received 5 years for conspiracy, familial abuse, and concealing a criminal act. Their mansion in Ashmont was sealed for asset investigation. The Wellington Land Trust, the very thing they had tried to protect at all costs, was placed under temporary state control as no legal heir remained who met the original conditions Madison gave birth in prison that March. A healthy baby boy named Elijah. The child was placed under state protection and cared for by a carefully screened foster family. In April, Jason visited me one afternoon, the early spring breeze softening the air. He held a file in his hand, his face somber but resolute. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady, "but you deserve to know the truth." "I've been granted custody of Elijah," Jason said quietly, his voice steady yet filled with a weight I could feel from across the room. "I've changed his last name to Foster. I know that doesn't undo everything, but at least the boy won't carry the weight of someone else's guilt." I looked at him, my heart tightening. "I hope he grows up surrounded by love and kindness," I whispered. "And Jason, you did the right thing." Jason gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable, yet there was something in his eyes that spoke volumes. "I used to think I was just a bystander," he said softly. "But the truth is, you were the only one who saw it all clearly from the beginning." He paused for a moment, as if considering his next words carefully. Then he looked at me one last time before turning to leave. "If someday Elijah wants to know about the person who stood up for what was right," he said, voice steady but soft, "I'll tell him about you, not as a victim, but as the strongest person I've ever known." I stood on the porch watching as Jason walked away the stroller with Elijah gently rocking behind him. The image of them fading into the distance left a bittersweet knot in my chest. I had once lost everything fallen into pieces, but now I knew justice wasn't just about verdicts. It wasn't about getting back what was taken. It was when the truth was finally brought to light, and those who were hurt were called by their true name. Survivors, people worthy of love, people who no longer bowed their heads. The summer after the final court hearing, with the name Wellington no longer haunting my every dream, Marcus and I moved to a small coastal town called Belfort. Our new home sat just minutes from the ocean, surrounded by neat rows of lavender. Marcus had designed himself and a sunlit studio where I slowly began to sketch again, something I hadn't done in months, when it felt like I had lost the ability to create. My spine had nearly healed, though the ache still flared when the weather shifted. It was a quiet reminder that some wounds don't vanish, but you learn to live with them. Strangely, I no longer feared that pain. It had become part of me, like a beautiful scar, a proof that I had survived. I never reached out to my mother, my father, or Madison. There were no calls, no handwritten letters, not even a hint of an apology. And you know what? I didn't need one. The silence between us, cold yet liberating, was the final period I needed to begin a new chapter. One early fall afternoon, Aunt Evelyn came to visit, bringing with her a young guest. The girl's name was Lily, 10 years old, with long brown hair and gray-blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a sky full of loneliness. "She's the daughter of an old friend," Aunt Evelyn explained softly. "Her mother died in a car accident 3 months ago, and her father is missing. She's currently under temporary care at a state shelter. They say she's quiet and distant. When I mentioned you, she said she wanted to meet you." I knelt down to meet Lily's eyes, feeling the warmth of her gaze. "Do you want to draw?" I offered her my sketchbook. Her face lit up with a soft smile. I like drawing houses with really big windows, she whispered. So when I'm sad, I can still see the sky. For some reason, her words caught in my throat, a lump rising inside me that I couldn't swallow. I handed her a box of colored pencils, and for the rest of the afternoon, we sat side by side in quiet companionship. Neither of us said much, but the connection between us was there. Lily drew, and as I watched her, something magical happened. This house, once haunted by shadows of the past, began to feel alive again, filled with the sound of a child's quiet joy drifting through the windows. That night, as Marcus and I cleared the dinner table, he looked at me, a glint of thoughtfulness in his eyes. "What would you think if we tried to adopt Lily?" he asked, his voice steady, but filled with something deep and uncertain. I went still, not from surprise, but because my heart suddenly clenched in the warmest way. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice soft with the weight of the question. Marcus smiled, taking my hand in his. "From the moment you started drawing again, from the moment Lily stepped into this house, I knew we were ready." 3 months later, with Clarissa's legal help, we completed the paperwork to become Lily's temporary guardians under special protective care. Marcus and I never promised to be perfect parents. We only promised never to abandon her, never to make her feel like love was something she had to earn. One Sunday morning, Lily sat in my studio coloring a picture she had drawn. In it, 3 people stood in front of a wooden house. A long-haired woman, a tall man, and a little girl holding a yellow umbrella. I watched her as she worked, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. "Lily," I asked gently, "who are you drawing?" "A new family," she said, her voice small but certain. Then she paused, looking up at me with those wide, uncertain eyes. "Do you think Mama Harper will like this picture?" I couldn't hold back the tears. I walked over to her, gathered her into my arms, and held her tightly. For the first time since I lost my baby, my heart felt whole. Family, true family, no longer meant bloodlines or a prestigious last name. It was the hand that steadied me when I fell. It was the trust in a child's eyes, the kind that had once known pain, but dared to open up again. Lily. This little girl didn't replace anyone, but she taught me that loss doesn't mean the end. It's the space where something new can grow. And this time, I would nurture it with love, without conditions, without fear. In the gentle light of morning, I knew I had found the most precious thing a lifetime could offer a real family. On an early October morning, with dew still clinging to the lavender outside our porch, I woke to the sound of little footsteps padding through the house. Lily was searching for the sketchbook she'd left behind the night before, flipping pillows on the chair and muttering, "It has to be here." I sat up smiling. "I saw it on the kitchen counter. You forgot to bring it upstairs." After drawing, Lily peeked out from behind the curtain, her eyes lighting up. "Thank goodness I thought it disappeared like my cookies last night," Marcus called up from downstairs. "The cookies disappeared into Daddy's stomach, gone into thin air." Laughter filled the house. A simple morning, an ordinary moment, but for me, it was a miracle. There was a time I believed I'd never have peace like this again. I had once been betrayed by my own family. In the cruelest way, I had fallen from a second-floor balcony, pushed by my own mother in front of a crowd. I had lost a child I never got to hold. But today, I stood here, not as a broken woman, but as a mother, a wife, and a survivor who had grown. We officially adopted Lily the following spring. The court hearing was brief. No tears of pain, only joy. When the judge banged the gavel and granted us permanent custody, Lily threw her arms around me and Marcus and whispered, "Can I really call you Mom and Dad now?" I nodded, my voice nearly breaking. "From now on, you are our daughter in every way." We threw a small party in the backyard to celebrate Lily officially becoming part of our family. No extravagant decorations, no fancy restaurants, just a few paper lanterns, a homemade chocolate cake baked by Marcus, and our first family photo taken beneath the oak tree in our front yard. That evening, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, Lily came up behind me and hugged me tightly. "Mama Harper," she said softly. I turned around, surprised by the strength in her embrace. "Yes, sweetheart. It's real family when you get to be yourself and not pretend to be someone else." I knelt down and looked into her gray-blue eyes, eyes that once held nothing but mistrust. "Exactly. Family is where you're loved for being you." She nodded and whispered, "I think I found my family." Her words floated as softly as the wind, and in my heart they rang like a bell of rebirth. I had spent so long searching for what family meant through pain, through shattered dreams. But now I understood. Family isn't bound by blood. It's not a place where you must mold yourself to be accepted. Real family sees every part of you, strong or fragile, and chooses to love you anyway. I once believed that without the baby I lost, I could never be a mother. But then I met Lily, a child who had lost everything too, and together we healed. I once thought that after being pushed by my own mother, I would never trust anyone again. But Marcus stood beside me, never asking for anything, just waiting patiently as I learned to rise. Now when I look at my little family gathered at the dinner table each night, I no longer feel regret. I feel only gratitude that the fall that could have ended my life opened the door to a new chapter, one filled with light and truth. From what seemed like the end, I rebuilt a new life, founded not on blood, but on love and kindness. I discovered that real family isn't defined by genetics, but by those who choose to stand by you every day. Harper's journey is proof that even from the deepest hurt, we can emerge into the light, stronger, freer, and full of hope for the future we truly deserve. What do you think about Harper's journey? Does family have to mean blood? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about life and family.